We're going to focus the conversation today around discovery. And Armand helped come up with the clever title that we have, How to Run a Sales Call That Doesn't Feel Like a Sales Call. Our goal is to give you guys some really actionable tips today on how to run a really great discovery call. I want to do some quick intros. We have Greg Refner. He's the CEO and founder of Abstract, who also happens to be the sponsor on the webinar today. Abstract's really cool. It's a real-time call coaching software. And one of the unique things that they do is, imagine making a cold call or doing a sales call and getting live feedback during that call and things that you can do to improve. So Greg, welcome. Good to have you. Armand, this is not our first time doing a webinar together. Armand does a bunch of things, but two of the things that are relevant to the conversation today: hosts one of my favorite sales podcasts, 30 Minutes to President's Club, and he's also a VP of sales at Pave. And I don't know how this guy has any time to even play video games with all the stuff that he's doing. But Armand, good to have you here as well. You two guys ready to dig in? Ready to get started?
Let's rock. I challenge the audience to a game of Smash any day as well.
I was going to say Mario Kart, but Smash sounds pretty good too.
Yeah. So Greg, we'll start with you. I'm curious, just for both of you. And Greg, we'll start with you. How did you learn how to do a sales call? Were you ever formally taught how to do a discovery call? Did you learn how to do it yourself? Like, what's the story there?
Cool. So short answer is no. My cold calling career started about 8.5 years ago when I was an SDR at a company called Acton Software. And I started basically day one. I was told, hey, here's this list. Go figure out how to call it. And what I quickly realized is I had no clue what I was doing. And so I learned by starting my day at 3 a.m. every day and listening to reps out of Europe make cold calls into the United States. And so that's kind of how I learned how to cold call, because they kind of had to learn culture of the United States being different than reps over in the kind of the UK. And so I kind of learned from reps in the UK calling into the United States how to cold call from like 3 a.m. until 8 a.m. when then I would start my calls during my day. And so I kind of just learned through observation and learning very early in the morning. It's kind of how I learned how to pick up the phone and call strangers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone in the audience relates, but I think the experience for most reps is they learn mostly just by observing other people. Don't really get a lot of, kind of training. Armand, what about you? What's kind of the story behind how you learned how to do sales calls, particularly, disco calls? I know you've sold a bunch of different stuff too, but what kind of training did you get early on when you were learning how to do this stuff?
My first sales job ever was selling life insurance, which was actually probably the hardest product that I sold in my entire life, no pun intended. And because you're selling something that truly does not exist. Like they give you money for it and they only use it if they die, which is really hard to sell and a rather morbid topic to talk about. And so anywho, it was at a company called Northwestern Mutual. And that is where I got looked in the eye by the managing partner. And I remember there was 1 week where I didn't hit 200 cold calls. And he says, you miss your cold call commit next week, you're out of this place. And from that point on, I never missed my cold call commit ever. And I was like, well, geez, I guess I'm just going to start banging the phones and start banging the phones. And I hit my $200 a week. That's where I actually heard the name tossed around opener, if you guys have heard of that one before. But then eventually I was like, wait, when I actually set up these meetings, how do I actually run these calls? They handed me this big packet and it was called a fact finder. And this fact finder walked you through a series of questions that you were supposed to ask in an insurance discovery call. And it would start with, what are your financial goals? And then it would start with these really cringy questions like, what would you do if you could not meet your financial goals? And so I thought it was really uncomfortable to ask these questions. But my first discovery call, I literally was selling to my cousin and read every single one of those questions for 2 hours off the book. And he was super uncomfortable. He was like, this is pretty weird. And then I started following along top producers and trying to figure out what they were doing and sort of develop my own method from there.
Interesting. So this is a good segue into where I want to get started, is what is discovery and what's the purpose for it? But let's ask the audience first. I'd love to kind of test here, everyone in the audience. what do you feel like the purpose of discovery is? If you had to summarize it in a couple words or a sentence, let us know in the chat. What do you feel like is the purpose of that first sales call, that first discovery call? Okay, bring out pain points, qualification. We got a lot of opinions here on this call about qualification and when to do it. Asking questions, fact finding, identifying issues, uncovering needs, fits.
So a lot of similarities there.
Customer story. Yep, a lot of patterns here.
It is. Build some
Greg, let's start. Greg, I want to kick a question your way as a kind of tag on what Armand just said. He just gave this a brilliant example of basically being given a set of questions and to just go through those questions in that first call. What do you think about questions and their purpose with discovery? Where do you see like reps making mistakes with the questions that they ask? How many questions they decide to ask? Where do you feel questions kind of fits into Disco?
Well, I think the first mistake reps make is their mindset going into discovery or qualification. They're going into conversations trying to figure out, is this prospect a good fit for me? Can I sell them something? And I feel like should be the exact opposite. The mindset should be, what value can I bring to this person that I'm about to meet with, whether it's inbound or outbound. I think first mistake people make is mindset. And so you need to flip the mindset of what you're trying to accomplish going into a discovery call or a qualification call. And that, in my experience, kind of forms the foundation for how questions are asked. I'm a big fan of challenger sale. So kind of telling folks like, here's, not like, here's your pain points. It's here's the things that you probably don't even think about every night that you should be thinking about. And I feel like discovery questions, qualification questions, when delivered with the right mindset, kind of an unselfish mindset, I think kind of forms the foundation for success throughout the rest of that sales process. But biggest mistake, going in with a selfish mindset that you're trying to figure out, does this person lead to my next commission check? That needs to be flipped in my experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know about you guys, but this was something when I first got into sales, I was, selling house painting services, door to door. And I was also a college student. So money was a really big motivator for me, right? And one of the big things that, to your point, that I found is that when I made it all about trying to get money from people, it just didn't feel very good. And it was really hard to actually advise someone when they would ask, what do you think that we should do? Which I think is the question that we want to get asked by prospects. What do you think that we should do? And people don't trust people that are very selfish, in their motive. Armand, with that mindset flip, how do you kind of think about the mindset a part of it? And what advice, because you work with a ton of reps as well, what advice would you have for someone maybe that isn't quite thinking like that and how they could prioritize the prospect's needs a little bit more? What do you think?
So a lot of times people of the who, what, when, where, why. I don't even remember what the propositions, whatever they are. The who, what, when, where, why. A lot of people get really concerned about why questions. And that's probably the number one type of question that I ask on calls. And the reason for that is qualification questions feel like interrogations, right? And so Aditya actually called it out in the chat is the problem is most reps get onto a call and they've been taught BANT or MEDIC or MEDPIC or whatever combination of the 26 letters of the alphabet you want to throw in there. They've been taught that. And they're basically running a discovery call with the intent of getting the metrics, the economic buyer, the budget, the authority, the timeline, what have you. But what really matters is why the heck did this person take the call in the first place, right? And that is how I will always start my calls, is understanding, hey, we're going to spend a little bit of time getting to understand why you're even here in the first place, to see if there's a problem that we can solve. And so that's how I always start my calls, is why did you take the call? And anytime there's anyone who's ever saying something like, oh, we thought it was about time we might start looking at a solution, the key thing is you should always just be asking why again. You can get a really long way through a call just by asking continuous why questions and just asking how did people come to the assumptions that they have today.
It's like my 4-year-old niece, like all she ever does is like, why, 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 why? Like that's all she ever asks me. And so, be my 4-year-old niece.
Yeah. And little kids are the best salespeople too, which is a topic for another time. But let's play on this. Let's keep going with the questions and the mindset around how we approach them. Armand mentioned something around why questions, and it's really interesting. What that made me think of is, and I'm curious what you guys think of this, the old saying that people buy based on emotion and justify with logic. Why gets the prospect in more of an emotional state, in my experience, where they feel like they need to justify the reason why they're doing something. And it gets them talking less about, because when I think of BANT, for example, those questions start with, what is your budget? What's your timeline? Who else might be involved with this? How are you thinking about this? When would be the ideal time to start? You think about all of those kind of things. None of those questions start with why. But what do you guys think about that old kind of saying in sales? People buy based on emotion and justify with logic. Do we agree with that? Do we disagree with it? Do we have a different thought on that? What do you guys think?
So I'll give a really practical example here. Is people, I very much think that people tend to buy based off of emotion, then seek out the reasons to justify that emotion. And I'll give you an example of like this why questioning an action. Okay. So no desire to plug my company, Pave. I don't think anyone here is the buyer of Pave, but just as an example, what Pave does is we have total reward statements that help companies communicate the upside of their benefits, salary, and equity packages, right? And oftentimes, a problem that will come up is someone will say, my employees don't understand equity. Okay. Right. To me, there's no emotion attached to that. It's a very just straightforward problem, right? By asking a simple why question, I can get to a story. And that story has emotions and visceral pain attached to it. Okay. And so I can ask a why question without explicitly even using the word why. And what I'm going to ask them is, why do you think that? Or in other words, when was the moment you realized that like people didn't understand equity? And almost always you get a story where it's like, this employee, they came to me and they were complaining about their comp. And the next thing you know, they took a job offer for $5,000 less and what have you. And just by asking that why question, you now have a story that's gotten the emotions high. And that emotion is going to be what's used to justify the ultimately logical decision. But if there's no emotion driving the sale, it's really, really hard for people to build a mathematical equation to justify, yes, I should make this logical purchase today.
Yeah. Greg, what do you think?
I agree. It goes in Simon Sinek's Start With Why. He kind of talks about the lizard brain and the kind of using logic to justify emotion. Kind of goes back to flight or fight type of mentality, right? Like tapping into emotion it's a challenge. I think we had John McCorkle mentioned Chris Voss. Never split the difference. Kind of talks about how questions versus why questions. How questions get people to think about how they're going to go about doing things as opposed to explaining why they're trying to solve a problem. And so I also think how questions also can lend themselves to driving some emotion because again, they start, human beings just naturally kind of go to revert back to our core instincts of kind of pain versus pleasure, fight or flight. And how questions can also do that sometimes because it makes people introspectively think about how they're going to solve a problem with your solution, in addition to the kind of the why, which elicits that storytelling.
Yeah. So I want to spend some time on this because I think having a really good set of questions is so crucial. And to just tag on the emotion piece, I'll give you two examples. Two of the most expensive things that I've purchased in our business is coaching. $3,000 a month, and then we're about to move into HubSpot, which is a couple $1,000s a month of technology, which we haven't really spent that much money on a CRM or anything like that before. The person I have to sell is my wife. So she's like the CFO of our business and relationship. So we run our business together. She mostly focuses on that part. It is totally emotional. When I thought about the coaching, it's like, I need this because I don't think that I know how to structure this program in the way that it needs to be. I don't think I know how to sell this thing properly. I don't think I know what to charge. It's the feeling of not knowing what I should know that is making it so urgent for me. And then she stops me and says, well, let's talk about the numbers here. What's the ROI of this going to be? That's not my driver, though. And I think that's a really good example of, like, especially a champion that you might be talking to, having that emotional element. In Armand, your partner in crime, Nick Sigelski, talks about this a lot too, getting to the story, not your customer story, getting the prospect to share a story. I thought was really interesting. So let's dig into, like, if we kind of step back a little bit with questions, let's talk about the setup for this first so that we can get the prospect into an environment where they even feel comfortable answering some of our questions. Typically, in the first couple minutes of a call, I'll throw this question your way, Armand, first. How do you suggest getting the call started? So let's talk about the first 5 minutes. What are we doing in that first 5 minutes to create an environment where we can ask questions and prospects will be open to answering them?
Totally. So first 5 minutes usually includes lightweight building rapport and then some sort of agenda. Okay. Let's talk about the rapport piece for a quick second. I typically don't love building 20 minutes of rapport. I also don't like talking about the weather and stuff like that. Someone mentioned it in the chat earlier, is you should be using targeted research based on, have they switched jobs recently? Did they get a promotion? Is their company growing a ton? And use that to show in the first 90 seconds of the call that you've done your research. Hey, congrats on the round that you guys just raised. What's it like internally? Or, oh, you've been at this company for 6 years. You must have seen tons of groups of folks come through the doors. I'm curious, like, what is it like to be one of the veterans on the team? Set the tone that you've done your research up front, right? And then I quickly like to segue into an agenda. I use the Doug Landis purpose plan outcome in the first 5 minutes of the call. And the reason that this is important is there are a couple things that a buyer is really itching to do. And then there are a couple things that I really want them to do throughout the call. So first piece is usually the button they're clicking on your website says what? It says request a demo. It says request a demo. Okay. And what that means is they're jumping onto a call expecting a demo. And as you all know, this is not a demo webinar. This is a discovery webinar. And so upfront, I actually need to recalibrate them. And then at the end, I need to make sure that you and I are aligned on where the sales cycle is going. So here's what purpose plan outcome would sound like. Purpose. Look, Jason, the reason that I'm jumping on this call with you today is honestly, sometimes we can help customers with PAVE, other times we can. And my goal is just to understand if there's a problem that we can help you solve and give you a sense of where we can be helpful if we can. That's the purpose, the plan. The way we're going to do that is usually it's helpful to start with like why you took the call and what you're doing around compensation overall, just to get a sense of like if there's a problem we can solve so we know exactly what we can show you. That's how we're going to do it, the plan. The outcome, right? Here's the thing. I'm going to plant the seed for the next step. And then at the end of this call, you're going to have a good sense of whether or not you want to like go deeper on this thing. And at that point, we would book a deeper dive demo. And oftentimes we would loop in like your chief people officer to join the call as well. But we can talk about that at the end. But does that sound like a high level plan that works for you? Awesome. So now I'm planting the seed for multi-threading at the end of the call. And if they're not okay with that, I want them to bring that up at the beginning of the call.
Yeah. Greg, do you have a different style or any other different type of approach that you like to use in that first couple minutes?
I would say my approach is not nearly as well kind of articulated as Armand's, but I try to accomplish the same thing. So typically every call is, if it's an inbound, why did you request a demo of abstract? If it's outbound, I'm a big fan of like assuming rapport. So I'll do a little bit of research just to be like, hey, I know who you are. I know what kind of pain points you have. But what I always like to do is, hey, Jason, thanks for jumping on. Really appreciate it. My goal, kind of set some precedents for what I'm looking to try to accomplish to see if it aligns with the prospect, is I want to figure out as fast as possible if we can help you or not. In order to do that, I'm going to share a little bit about what we do, share a little bit about maybe what you're trying to struggle with. If there's alignment, maybe we jump into a quick demo because that's what I know you wanted to see. If not, I'll give you 10 minutes back in your day. Does that sound fair? Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Chris Voss' use of the word fair. No one ever wants to be unfair, so everybody always agrees to that. At the end, if we've done a demo and everything looks good, similar to Armand's, typically we talk with someone in sales development leadership or revenue ops, something like that. Does it sound like maybe a good next step to pull somebody like that in? Again, get permission to multi-thread at the end, and then we always try to end with some type of clear next step on the calendar. But big thing for me is I always try to do a little bit of a takeaway up front. Like, we may not be a good fit for you. We may not be able to help. And I'll be the first to tell you, because I don't want to spend half an hour with you if we're not a good fit. And I've found people generally respect that.
Yeah, you just sound less thirsty when you're doing that too. And one thing I forgot to mention for the audience, if you have questions, the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom, click that, drop them in. A few people, Steve and Alan, have dropped in questions. We'll try to get to them as we go. Greg, so just a follow-up question with that. What do you do if a prospect hops on a call and they kind of try to take the call over in the first 2 to 3 minutes? They don't let you get into this. It's that driver type, whoever, this happens, and some people I bet can relate here in the audience too. What do you do to regain control of the call?
Ooh. Sometimes, depending upon the day, depending upon if my 2-year-old and my 1-month-old have let me sleep the night before, I might be like, sweet, you run this call. No, I'm just kidding. That's a tricky thing. It's I think it always comes back to, one, not trying to fight it. So you kind of have to let a dominant person express their dominance and then meet dominance with dominance. And so there's been, just last week, I was on a call with a CRO. He jumped on. He's like, Greg, not interested in answering any of your questions. I just want to see a demo of the product. Sweet. Cool. Within 30 seconds, we were demoing Abstract, which is not the way I like to go about doing it, but it is what it is. And so I give and take, right? Big fan of give and take. So I gave him what he was asking for. As we started going through the demo, then it allowed me to start asking some questions. Talk to me about your conversion rates, kind of talk to me about why you were interested in taking a look at this in the first place. And once I kind of gave him what he wanted, I was able to regain control of the call again, and the outcome was actually really positive. So I try not to fight it. I'm always conscious of, maybe this person's having a really bad day. Maybe this person is back to back for 12 hours today. Maybe someone told them to do something they don't want to do in the first place. And so even in situations where I couldn't even get an agenda on the calendar, Dan, like you mentioned, cool. Let's play it your way. And then I know over time, either I'll be able to pull myself back in, or we'll get next steps because he'll like what he sees, or we'll end the call very, very quickly. 5 minutes in, he's like, oh, this sucks. This is garbage. Never talking to you guys again. Cool. So I don't fight it.
Yeah, I like that. Armand, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are 2 or 3 situations that this will happen. The first situation is if you didn't set that expectation up front in your agenda. The second is if your questions feel like the ones that we were talking about earlier, where it feels like they're just being qualified, where these questions are adding no value to them. They're just being interrogated and you're not giving them anything back, even through stories or what have you. Or the third is what Greg referenced, which is sometimes you just get a bull in a china shop. Okay. And so I'm going to address the third piece, which is what do you do when you get a bull in a china shop? Because the reality is it just happens sometimes. It still happens to me. I jump on a call where they're just like, I know you're going to ask me 20 sales questions and then show me software maybe on the next call. I don't have time for that. Show me software. They've been scarred by all of the past interrogations they've gotten in the past. And so I'm a big believer that you don't disagree with customers. You just convince them that your ideas are their ideas. Right? And so Exactly. And so here's a great statement that you can use to sort of Mr. Miyagi your way back into discovery. And then you'll do what's called demo discovery, right? And so let's say that Greg is the angry CEO. I know you guys can tell he's really having a bad day today, right? And he's just ripping my head off. And he's like, Armand, I just want to see your demo. I'm going to be like, Greg, no problem. Normally, what I would do is I would get to understand what's important to you so I know exactly what to show you. But it sounds like you already know exactly what you want. Could you give me a sense, just so I don't show you everything in the world, what's important for you to see over the next 15 minutes, just so I don't waste your time? I've basically kicked off discovery and I've gotten immediately to the why they're on the call. And so I'll be like, hey, if there are 3 things you need to see, what do you need to see? In what order? Boom, 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 right? To be clear, there still might be a chance that they say, just show me the software. And at which point I'll jump in. Then what you need to do is throughout the call, you're going to do demo discovery. And so you need to ask tons of questions throughout the demo. After each riff, I'm curious, how does this work today? I'm curious, is this what you had in mind? Typically, what we see with other CEOs, XYZ isn't important to them. Are you an A or a B type of company, et cetera? And so you'll continue to do discovery throughout the demo.
Yeah, I love that. So as part when we demo abstract, like we'll always throw in stuff from them, like who's your biggest competitor? What objections do you consistently see your SDRs fail at, handling? And with each question, you kind of earn the right to kind of keep asking questions, I found. And so you kind of slowly start to chip away at that through demo discovery. I think you should trademark that, Vermont, by the way.
Yeah.
So
what I heard from both of you is a few things. One, there's a lot of empathy. So you're thinking about, hey, what's this person thinking? What kind of day are they having, et cetera? The other thing too is that neither of you are super stubborn about, I have to do it this way, because you see that a lot, at least on the advice in LinkedIn, no discovery, no demo. And I would lose deals if I didn't talk about our training programs or show people what a playbook might look like when they asked me, especially an executive. And I don't know about you, I'm not in a position where I'm just going to throw away a really large enterprise opportunity just because they want to see something and I'm too stubborn to show it to them. You know what I mean? So, okay, let's kind of transition. So we have our first 5 minutes. Armand, I'll kick this question your way. One of the big things that we talked about in preparation of this, and we all watch a lot of discovery calls here or demo calls, right? We listen to them, we watch them. You guys have people on your team. We do a lot of coaching with this. And one of the big things that I see as a struggle is getting to something that is really meaningful in terms of what is the larger goal that this person is trying to use our solution to potentially solve, and what problems are getting in the way of that versus what technical problem they might be having. And an example of that is someone selling sales engagement tools. It's, what is the pipeline they're trying to generate from this versus, oh yeah, we need to thread follow-up emails on the same email chain, that kind of stuff. So Armand, how do you think about, after we've, set this up well, how do we get to the meaningful stuff that really drive a business conversation?
Yeah. And so there are technical problems that feed into business problems that feed into things that ultimately impact the business. And that's sort of the progression of how you might ask questions, right? And so let's use an example that works for the entire audience, right? Let's say that I'm working with a software that allows you to send emails in a more automated fashion as an SDR, right? And someone jumps on the call and we ask them, why'd you take the call? And be like, oh, I want my SDRs to send emails faster. I want to be able to do templates XYZ and insert snippets ABC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that's all technical situations. Those are all process problems, right? My goal is to turn those technical problems into, we need to make this decision so that we can meet revenue targets, right? But if I just ask an obnoxious question that jumps 3 steps and says, interesting, how do those snippets relate to your top line revenue goals for this year? They're going to be like, dude, really? They're going to be like, did you really just ask me that question? Or like, are you really just trying to put me into a sales trap and get me to quantify the ROI of your tool? Okay. And so what you need to do is slowly walk them deeper through, again, why questions. And I know not everyone loves why questions, but to be clear, why questions don't have to have the word why in them. It's about the intent of understanding why it is important to them. And so a good example would be like, interesting, that's a very specific thing that you're asking for. I'm curious, typically when people are asking for extremely technical snippet solutions, what have you, it's either because like their SDR team isn't, they feel like their SDR team isn't cold emailing effectively, or they feel like they're not their SDR's messaging isn't great, what have you. Like, I'm curious, like, what is it that like led you to that very specific like technical requirement, right? And so I'm trying to understand how they got to that. And then once you get to that, you'll usually get something along the lines of our SDRs aren't sending great messaging. And then all you're going to do is you're going to ask that same question again. And you're going to be like, interesting. Was there like a moment when you realized that the messaging wasn't effective? Was it that like, certain SDRs weren't hitting their meeting targets, or like your meetings from cold emails were like much lower than you expected? And now I'm getting to the business problem. So all you need to do is just keep asking why from the technical problem to pull them up to the business problem. And that's what discovery is you're turning business problems into technical solutions, but usually you have to actually start your discovery the other way around.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to highlight that Armand does a lot is he speaks in what I've heard referred to and I call customer voice. So when you ask a question, you suggest things that you hear from other peers like them. So I'm curious, are you approaching this in the way that we oftentimes hear, like this, or are you doing it a completely different way? Or is your goal, which we hear from a lot of sales development leaders, to do this, or is it something else? Can you talk about that technique real quick, Armand?
Yeah, so I put something in the chat that says never ask naked questions, right? And so what a naked question, it sounds sort of weird, but a naked question sounds like, well, Jason, when did you realize that you wanted snippets? Or when did you realize you wanted to do better personalization, right? And the reason that is important is because there are two things that I can do by asking a multiple choice question. Number one is I can show them, hey, I've seen this problem a couple times, and here are 3 or 4 ways that I see this problem manifest. So I'm demonstrating credibility. But then number 2 is I'm helping them jog the memory in the way that I want them to jog the memory, right? Those 2 or 3 options are usually things that I can help with. And so instead of it being this super open-ended, sprawling discovery question, I can start to funnel them into the 2 or 3 problems that I can solve related to email personalization. And meanwhile, I'm also coming off as an advisor, and it also just softens the question a little bit and dulls it because they don't feel like they're the only person in the world having that problem.
Yes. So I call this the McDonald's, like, would you like small or medium fries?
I like this.
It limits their choices so they don't have to think. It shows them, the customer, hey, I know that you probably want these already, so I'm giving you the 2 best options for you. I like naked questions way better, but yeah, for the past 8 years, I've called it the McDonald's, would you like fries with that question?
I'm calling it McDonald's questions, Greg. That is far better than never ask naked questions.
That is hilarious. So I think I want to highlight this because this is so important, this topic we're talking about right now. With your questions, if you just sat down and thought about, hey, the last 10 disco calls that I did or demo calls, what were the common scenarios that these people found themselves in? And then if you have 3, you only really need maybe 3, 4 of those questions. And if you could talk to the context of what other people are doing, what your best clients are doing. One of the things I always come back to is I interviewed Henry Schuck, CEO of ZoomInfo, on the podcast. And one thing he shared when he said that, because I asked him, when you're a prospect, when someone's trying to sell something to ZoomInfo and you have to hop on a sales call because it's a really large transformational deal, what do you want to take away from it? Like, why are you there? And he said, the biggest thing that I want to know is who is using your solution in a best in class way. So who's using it? What are they doing that's going to help me not go from step A to B, but from A to E and skip all the other BS in the middle? And that's essentially what you're doing with this is you're sharing what other people are doing and thinking about. You know what I want to know from every one of my peers that's more successful to me? How do they think about stuff? What are they prioritizing? What are they focused on? So really think about that. That's a really great takeaway. Greg, follow up to that with questions. One thing that you do a lot is like you customize the questions. I thought that was really cool. So you sell conversational intelligence. Who are you competing against? What objections are you running across? Like, how do you think about kind of catering the question, I guess, to the prospect that might be on the call with you?
That's a good question. It kind of ties into what are those kind of 10 scenarios that you find are repeat scenarios over and over and over again. And so when we talk with our customers, they are jumping on a Zoom call with 30 SDRs, and they're all in a Zoom call, and they're all making cold calls, and they're all waiting until somebody picks up. And then when one person gets a connect, everybody kind of goes on mute and listens to how they handle that objection. Or they're listening to call recordings on their drive to and from the office, trying to identify, coaching opportunities. So we know what those pain points are. And so when I think of like customizing questions, the research that I'll do ahead of time, if it is, let's say, security scorecard, one of our customers, first call I got on with them, hey, how often does Beyond Trust come up as a competitor on your guys' prospecting calls? So I kind of know a little bit about who their competitors are. And I know that their pain point is their reps probably miss an opportunity to handle that competitive objection most of the time. And so I'll typically throw in some diligence around knowing who their competitors are, knowing a little bit about their buyer, and then I'll kind of weave those into the common themes that I know my buyer is going to struggle with already.
Yeah, I love that. What do you guys do when you're doing the questioning? And I'll just kind of kick this out to both of you and leave it open-ended here. Because David asked, what do you do when the other person simply won't stop talking? And let's say that they start going on a rant and it's about something that's maybe not productive for the call for either of you. What do you guys do in those moments?
I just love talk. Go on, Armand.
It's tricky because I'll let it slide once because we might have pulled the one chord that was like we struck a chord and like for whatever reason we got them on this one tangent. But every once in a while, you get these prospects who they just go and go and go and go and go. And like oftentimes one thing that we track is like a talk to listen ratio, for example. And like it's actually bad to have like an 80% listen ratio because that means like you probably let the call get out of your hands, right? And so usually, not always, usually there is at least one thing that they're saying that can be used as a thread that you can use to pull them back, right? And so again, I don't like fighting prospects. I don't like disagreeing with prospects. I like that to get them to just think that my ideas were their ideas, right? And so all I'm going to say is like, wait, hold on. I want to hear about this in just a second, but you mentioned something really important that like, I don't think everyone in the world realizes, or you mentioned something that was really smart here, and I want to dig deeper there. Let's go into this other stuff, but this is super important, what you mentioned earlier. Can we talk about this for a second? They'll be like, yeah, let's do it. And so I try to redirect them to the 1% of truth that they said that is in line with what I want to call, and then try to blow that 1% into the remaining 99% of the call that remains.
Yeah. I'll give you guys a line that I use a lot. This is an interviewing technique that works really good too. Sorry for interrupting you. And then I love Armand's talk track there where you'll go back. You mentioned this thing I thought was really good. I'd love to focus on that. Or you mentioned this priority or this goal, but hey, even raising your hand a little bit. Oh, hey, Armand, sorry for interrupting you. you mentioned something that I think is really important for us to double click in. Can we talk about that? There's nothing wrong with interrupting people. I can only think of a few scenarios where this has happened to me, but I mean, the first call with me is 30 minutes. And I had a guy one time that burned up the first 12 minutes just talking the entire time about stuff that was not even relevant to our conversation, but not building rapport. You know what I mean? I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts,
Yeah.
Greg?
It's not black or white. I'm perfectly okay letting someone talk, because sometimes, like in my career in sales, I found that sometimes I'm a therapist and I just need to listen sometimes. And I find it's a good way to show the person I'm talking to that I'm listening, because even if it's not relevant, I'll kind of sit down, take some notes. Maybe they're telling me about their kids or their husband or their job or, soccer practice on the weekends. There's something in there that I can kind of pick up on and maybe talk about after the 12 minutes of rant is over. And people like to reciprocate. I think humans love telling stories and having someone to listen to. And when someone else listens to you, you feel the need to reciprocate that back to them. And so I find that get on a call and someone's having a really bad day, they just need to talk 15 minutes. Sweet. This is awesome. Because I don't really enjoy talking, even though I'm on a webinar in front of 252 people. But I enjoy it because I can pick something up from that. And then I found that it's always reciprocated, where I can then be like, oh, interesting. Tell me more about soccer practice, blah, blah, blah. And then it generally that builds trust, because now I've listened, I've shown that I'm listening. And then we can either get into what we were supposed to talk about or quickly find out like, hey, this isn't a fit, get a referral out of it, maybe an evangelist for us. There's not generally a super bad outcome just by kind of letting someone talk sometimes.
I want to highlight something because this kind of brings the conversation full circle to what we talked about at the beginning when you mentioned mindset, Greg, and you said something along the lines of, if you really give a shit about the other person and make the call about helping them, keep that lens up, keep that lens on during the disco call. Because if it's helping this person figure out if this is a fit for them, then it's good to spend that time on,
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to shift gears a bit because multi-threading, a really, really big topic that we've kind of brought up and talked about, but really, honestly, for me, because I'm just a student of sales all the time, it's my biggest weakness that I notice, because I'm starting to sell to bigger companies and I have to do more of it. And I'm finding out, like, hey, I actually need to improve this. I need to get a little better at it. So multi-threading, super important. There's a lot of data from a lot of different places. All of it will support that the more people you get involved, especially early on in the sales process, the higher your win rates are going to be. So when we think about multi-threading, Armand, I'll kick this question your way. You're bringing it up as soon as the first 5 minutes of the call. You're bringing it up in the intro. Can you explain why, again, it's important to start talking about it early, and then how this might come up later on in the call?
Yeah. So think of discovery as the ignition on a car. Okay. So discovery allows you to drive a car forward. Okay. Your agenda and the last 5 minutes of your call, what I call the 5-minute drill, that's your steering wheel to make sure that your car is going in the right direction. And even if I know I'm not going to make a left turn for 100 miles, right? Because I'm going to have to do another discovery call with my champion. I want them to know that a left turn is coming, right? It's really important that they know it's coming, because the worst case scenario is we drive 100 miles together and then we realize that there's a road blockage. So we shouldn't have driven the 100 miles in the first place, right? And so a lot of reps, I find they give things away for free. They give away a demo for free. They give away pricing for free. They give away a proposal for free. And I'm fine doing all of those things. I have no issue doing a demo, a proposal, what have you, if we are in agreement that we have a problem that you can solve, and we're in agreement that typically what needs to happen to get a deal done is you need to have your VP of sales involved, or you have to have your CMO involved, for instance, right? And that's why it's important is I don't want to waste your time with 3 or 4 more calls if you don't want to get us in front of power, um, because there's not going to be a way that we can actually solve your problems together. And so you have to bring this stuff up early on. And I'm happy to talk about how you explicitly do that at the end of a call.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that real quick, Jason?
Oh, absolutely, Greg.
So to add on that, I agree. One thing I would say caution is like, don't ever assume the person you're talking to, doesn't have the power, because you may be talking to somebody who has been given the power and just maybe their title doesn't necessarily kind of lend itself towards power. So I'm always cautious about that. One thing that I learned how to go about doing that is, hey, Jason, I noticed that, Armand is your VP of sales. Before we present this to Armand, how do I make sure you look good when we present this to Armand? Kind of help your champion look good to their boss as a way of helping bring them in. And I learned that from Skip Miller's kind of above the line approach and looping in, executive sponsors early on. So I always try to position it as help me help you look good to the person I want to talk to.
Yeah. We were just talking about this on one of our outbound squad coaching calls yesterday with a rep, and it was really focused on that part, really making sure your champion, you understand their personal motivation and that they are sold first. Armand, we talked about this a little bit, I think last time we talked too. Is the person you're talking to at least sold on this, if it was up to them? And then it becomes this, as Ian Altman would say, same side selling, where it's me and the prospect working together against the problem or selling to their company, right? Armand, you have some other ways that you like to multi-thread and ask, and for just because I'm getting asked a lot, yes, the recording will be sent out to you guys afterwards, okay? And multi-threading, because a few people asked about that. Multi-threading is simply involving multiple people, more than one person, other people that are part of the buying community from that organization in the sales process. That doesn't always happen in the very first sales call. The very first sales call is often with an individual, and then it's looping in other people. But Armand, multi-threading, how do you like to ask for this? What are some techniques that we can use to ask?
100%. So here's a tactic called the 5-minute drill. Okay. And so the 5-minute drill are 3 questions that you need to ask at the end of every single discovery call, or at the end of every deep dive, or even at the end of like a big team exec demo. Okay. Those 3 questions in order are: number 1, do you want to buy? Right? Or do you believe that we have a problem that you can solve? Or do you believe that you have a problem that we can solve? Number 2, when do you want to buy? Okay. If this thing were free, when would you want to have it in place? And then number 3 is how. How do you want to buy? And the key thing that I want to pull out that Greg referenced is what I'm going to do is suggest what would typically happen in a buying process, but then I'm going to validate and ask, does that align with how you've bought software in the past? Or is your situation different? Or have you been given the keys to the car to make this call? And maybe this is just a you and me type of show for the next 3 years, right? And so those are the 3 questions you ask. Let's talk about the how process, because that's really where multi-threading comes in. Okay. So once they've told me, yes, I'd love to buy our tool. Awesome. We have an upcoming audit at the end of the year. We need to have it in place before that, or we have a product launch or what have you. Awesome. We would want to do it then. Great. So then based on that, look, typically what would happen is, like, to the point of same side selling, Jason, you and I would get on like the same side of the table here, because like, I think you're an awesome fit. And 9 times out of 10, usually what happens is your chief marketing officer would want to see this thing just because it's pretty close to brand, what we're talking about here. And then afterwards, we would have to build a business case to put it in front of your CFO, just because we're not talking about small dollars and cents here. And so I'm curious, that's what I usually see. And I think there are some problems for us to solve here. But I'm curious, is that how you've bought software in the past? I want to make sure that I'm not assuming here. And so 1, I'm getting on the same side of the table, while 2, still suggesting that we get to power And then 3, explaining that, hey, it's in your best interest to introduce me to Power because you want to solve these problems and Power is going to care about those problems too, as opposed to, hey, it's time to introduce me to your boss.
Love it. Okay. Couple of like logistical questions around this, around the scheduling of the next part. So, okay. So let's say Armand, you're selling to me. Greg's my boss. We need to get him on the next call. How do you logistically schedule that with me on the call?
Yeah. And so always leave that call with 2 meetings at times 3. Okay. So the first thing is you're going to secure that meeting and you're going to be like, hey, I know Greg is a busy guy. Jason, could you pull up Greg's calendar by chance? Or does he have it on incognito so you can't see anything? Awesome. If they have the calendar, schedule the time on the spot. If they say, oh, no, I'm going to have to work with their EA or, oh, I can't see their calendar, I can be like, awesome. Jason, can I at least like both you and I get really busy? Can I put a couple holds on the calendar over the next couple weeks that work for you and I, just so that we have a few slots and we don't have to do the calendar back and forth then? Awesome. Now I have placeholders. What we do before those placeholders is I'm going to be like, Jason, one, I really appreciate you getting us in front of Greg. I want to make sure that like we address all of Greg's problems. And honestly, I also want to make sure we make you look good too, because like you and I have had these great conversations. Would you be completely against doing like a 15-minute prep call? In fact, like maybe I can just like shoot you a text a day before and we can jump on a call beforehand. So I'm doing 2 things. Number 1 is I'm setting up the prep call. And then number 2, I'm getting cell phone access at that point in time. And that's what's called the champion sandwich, is I want to set up the big team demo with Power. I want to set up the champion prep call before. And then after the champion prep call, I actually want to schedule the debrief for right after the big team demo so that I can sandwich the big team demo with a champion meeting before and a champion meeting afterwards.
Yeah. Greg, what are your thoughts on texting champions?
100% for it. I think you have to go where people want to go or want to communicate. I have one prospect who became a customer, never responded to phone calls, LinkedIn, email, text, or he never responded to phone calls, email, or text. 100% via LinkedIn. Even sent me the signed PDF of the contract via LinkedIn. So go where people want to go. If people are good on text, awesome. If not, go to email, phone, LinkedIn. Do what you got to do.
Yeah,
just be aware.
I think there's a big lesson there on channel preference and communication, and just asking can be really big. I don't know about you guys. When I have good enough rapport with a champion where we're texting about stuff, I think I have like an 80% close rate on those. I don't always get to text people, but I think if you proactively figure out someone's channel preference, like, dude, with texts, with people that are cool with that, I'm like, I'm going to get a response in less than 2 hours usually to something like that. Or sometimes right then. An email can go 48 hours, 72 hours, without getting a response on email. I love the champion sandwich, by the way, Herman. It's really funny.
Sandwiches and McDonald's, folks. You got a full meal today.
Yeah.
Okay. Quick questions. I'm going to do a couple of rapid fire questions. Okay. Greg, first one to you. What do you think about showing a slide deck during discovery?
I think PowerPoint is the worst thing ever. So no, hard no.
Ramon?
I don't like it. On a big team demo, I'll start with it to recap the key priorities and drive discovery in a big room. But on that first call, nothing.
Got it. One more question. This one's from both Barry and Alan have a very similar style question. Greg, what's your take on multiple decision makers getting involved later? We've multi-threaded. You multi-threaded with, you sold to Armand. I'm going to hop on the next call. Do you start discovery all over again? Do you catch the person up? Like what's kind of the process there? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Quick cliff notes. Hey, so I talked with so-and-so, they thought this and this and this was super important. this is why the champion sandwich is really important before that multiple decision maker call, because I want to hear from Armand, my champion, what's important to Jason, so I can make Armand look good and be like, hey, Armand said that this was going to be really important to you. Armand, did I miss anything? Awesome. Jason, what did I miss that you want to make sure we focus on today? I try to do that in 2 minutes or less.
Armand, how do you think about that?
So if you like childhood cartoons, I was a big Dragon Ball Z fan. And at the beginning of every episode of Dragon Ball Z, it would always say, on the last episode of Dragon Ball Z, Piccolo and Goku did XYZ, right? And so they would give you a quick recap of what happened on the last episode of Dragon Ball Z. And then what you do is what I like to call discovery verification, which is this is what we think happened in the last episode from that point of view. But I'm curious, every VP of sales has a slightly different perspective on sales training. For instance, I'm curious, based on what we're showing over here, does this align with what's important to you, or are there other things that we've missed? And so verify that they're aligned with the problems that you've identified in the past.
Dudes, we are out of time. I appreciate you both just for bringing a ton of value with this, and everyone in the audience. I appreciate all the questions, the engagement, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure to check out Abstract. Greg, I think the website's probably the best place to send these folks. Connect with Greg on LinkedIn. Let's blow his LinkedIn up. Okay, let's overwhelm him a bit.
There it is.
Armand.
Blow him up.
Thanks, Jason.
Armand over there at the 30 Minutes to President's Club. Make sure to check out Armand as well. Blow up his LinkedIn. Great content from both of these folks. We'll send out the replay to you guys afterwards. And that's all we got.
Thank you, guys.
Guys. Appreciate it.
Have
a good day.
Awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Day,
Take it easy. Peace out.
Bye.